we invite you to join us on a spiritual journey at D Faithful Journey. Have you ever pondered the depths of faith that are hidden from view? The detours that bring us nearer to God? Come along with me as we examine the Bible's secrets, the effectiveness of prayer, and the significant effects of leading a life that is fully devoted to Christ. Let's join you on this spiritual journey by subscribing right now. The dust swirled around David's sandals as he trudged across the parched landscape. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the rocky terrain into a furnace. He wasn't thinking of the heat, though. His heart, heavy as the stones beneath his feet, was focused on the lyre slung across his back. It was his only solace in this desolate place, a place he'd called home for far too long. He was a fugitive, hunted like a wild animal, his only crime being anointed by the prophet Samuel to be the future king of Israel. Saul, the current king, had descended into madness, consumed by jealousy and fear. He saw David, the shepherd boy who'd slain the giant Goliath, not as a hero, but as a threat. The cheers of the women, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s, echoed in Saul's ears as a death knell. So, David, the lyre player, the giant slayer, the anointed king, was now a hunted man, forced to flee for his life. He found refuge in the caves of Adullam, a dark, damp labyrinth echoing with the cries of bats. It wasn't a king's palace, but it was sanctuary. And to these caves came others, the outcasts, the indebted, the discontented 400 souls, drawn to David's charisma and the promise of a better future. He became their leader, not by force, but by the strength of his character, his music, and his unwavering faith in God's promise. From Adullam, David moved to the forest of Hereth, a tangled wilderness where danger lurked behind every tree. Saul pursued him relentlessly, his army like a swarm of locusts devouring everything in their path. David and his men were constantly on the move, dodging Saul's wrath, living by their wits and the grace of God. He learned to be a warrior, a strategist, a leader. He learned to trust in the Lord with every breath. One night, while Saul and his army slept, David and Abishai, his loyal nephew, crept into the enemy camp. The silence was thick with tension, broken only by the crackle of the dying embers of the campfires. Saul lay asleep, his spear stuck in the ground beside his head. Abishai whispered, "God has delivered your enemy into your hands. Now let me pin him to the ground with his own spear. I won't need to strike him twice." David looked at Saul, the men who had hunted him for years, the men who had tried to kill him countless times. He saw not a monster, but a man, vulnerable and asleep. He remembered the words of Samuel, the anointing, the promise. "As the Lord lives," David said, "I will not lift my hand against the Lord's anointed. Who can attack him and remain guiltless?" He took Saul's spear and water jug, leaving them as proof of his mercy. The next morning, from a safe distance, David called out to Saul's men, rebuking their negligence. Saul, awakened and humiliated, recognized David's voice. "Is that your voice, my son David?" he cried. Tears streamed down his face. "You are more righteous than I," he admitted. "You have repaid me good for evil. May the Lord reward you for the kindness you showed me today." Saul returned to his palace, but his repentance was fleeting. His fear and jealousy soon resurfaced, and the hunt for David resumed. David, weary of the constant pursuit, sought refuge with Achish, the king of Gath, in Philistine territory. It was a risky move, aligning himself with Israel's enemies, but it was a desperate measure. He hoped that Saul, seeing him in Philistine territory, would finally give up the chase. Achish welcomed David, impressed by his reputation as a warrior. He granted David and his men the city of Ziklag. David lived among the Philistines for over a year, but his heart remained loyal to Israel. He used his position to protect his own people, raiding other towns and making it appear to Achish that he was attacking Israelite settlements. Meanwhile, Saul, desperate and abandoned by God, consulted a medium at Endor. The spirit of Samuel was summoned, and the prophet delivered a grim prophecy: Saul and his sons would die in battle against the Philistines. Saul, consumed by despair, knew his end was near. The battle raged on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines overwhelmed the Israelite army. Saul's sons were killed, and Saul himself was wounded by arrows. Rather than be captured alive, he fell on his own sword, ending his life. The news of Saul's death reached David in Ziklag. He tore his clothes and mourned, not with joy at his enemy's demise, but with sorrow for the fallen king and the tragedy that had befallen Israel. He composed a lament, a song of grief and respect for Saul and Jonathan, his beloved friend, Saul's son. The time of waiting was over. The shepherd boy, the lyre player, the fugitive, was finally called to claim his destiny. The men of Judah anointed David king over the house of Judah. Ishbosheth, Saul's surviving son, was made king over the rest of Israel, leading to a period of civil war. After 7 years of conflict, Ishbosheth was murdered, and the elders of all Israel came to Hebron and anointed David king over all Israel. He had proven himself worthy, not through ambition or violence, but through faith, courage, mercy, and unwavering loyalty to God. David's reign was marked by both triumphs and tragedies. He conquered Jerusalem, making it the capital of Israel. He brought the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, establishing it as the center of worship. He defeated the Philistines and other enemies, securing the borders of Israel. He established a strong and unified kingdom, fulfilling God's promise. But David was not without flaws. He committed adultery with Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah, one of his loyal soldiers, and then orchestrated Uriah's death to cover up his sin. This act brought a curse upon his house, and he faced rebellion and turmoil within his own family. Despite his failings, David's heart remained devoted to God. He repented for his sins and sought forgiveness. He composed many of the psalms, songs of praise, lament, and thanksgiving that continue to inspire and comfort people to this day. He desired to build a temple for the Lord, but God told him that his son would do so. David reigned for 40 years, leaving a lasting legacy. He was a complex figure, a warrior, a poet, a king, and a sinner. But above all, he was a man of faith, a man who loved God with all his heart. He was the shepherd who became king, a testament to the power of God's grace and the enduring promise that he exalts the humble. His story, etched in the annals of Israel's history, continues to inspire generations, a reminder that even the most flawed among us can be chosen for greatness if our hearts are right with God. The shepherd's crown, heavy with responsibility and marked by both glory and sorrow, ultimately rested upon the head of a man who knew that true kingship came not from power, but from service, humility, and unwavering faith. David was a simple shepherd when the prophet Samuel arrived at his father Jesse's house in Bethlehem. The Lord had rejected Saul as king, and God instructed Samuel to anoint a new ruler from among Jesse's sons. One by one, Jesse presented his sons, but the Lord rejected them all. At last, Samuel asked, "Are these all your sons?" Jesse hesitated, then mentioned his youngest, David, who was tending the sheep. When David was brought before Samuel, the prophet saw the glow of God's favor upon him. As the Lord spoke to Samuel's heart, he poured oil upon David's head and proclaimed, "This is the one." Though anointed, David remained a shepherd for years. He was but a boy, and the road to the throne would be long and treacherous. Yet, from that day, the Spirit of the Lord was upon him, preparing him for the trials ahead. David's fate took a dramatic turn when he arrived at the battlefield where Israel stood paralyzed before the Philistine champion, Goliath. Armed with nothing but faith, a sling, and 5 smooth stones, David faced the giant. As Goliath laughed, David declared, "You come to me with sword and spear, but I come to you in the name of the Lord." With a single stone, David struck Goliath in the forehead, felling the mighty warrior. The Philistines fled in terror, and Israel hailed David as a hero. Yet, his victory was only the beginning of his troubles. King Saul, once pleased with David, soon grew jealous. The chants of the people, "Saul has slain his thousands, but David his 10,000s," filled the king with rage. He plotted against David, forcing the young warrior to flee for his life. For years, David lived as an outlaw, hiding in caves and mountains, gathering a band of loyal warriors. Despite Saul's relentless pursuit, David refused to harm the Lord's anointed. Twice, he had the chance to kill Saul but chose mercy, proving his heart was set on righteousness, not revenge. During his exile, David became a leader, a protector of the weak, and a man after God's own heart. The trials of the wilderness refined him, preparing him for the weight of the crown he would one day bear. Saul's reign came to a tragic end on Mount Gilboa. Defeated by the Philistines, he fell upon his own sword, taking his life rather than face capture. His son Jonathan, David's closest friend, perished alongside him. When David heard the news, he tore his garments in grief and composed a lament for Saul and Jonathan, mourning them despite all that had passed between him and the fallen king. With Saul's death, the throne of Israel was vacant, but the path to kingship was not yet clear. The house of Saul clung to power, and Israel was divided. For 7 years, David ruled only over Judah, while Saul's son Ishbosheth reigned over the northern tribes. But Ishbosheth was weak, and strife within his own camp led to his assassination. With his death, the elders of Israel came to David, pleading with him to unite the kingdom. At Hebron, the elders of Israel anointed David king over the united kingdom. A shepherd no longer, he sat upon the throne, fulfilling God's promise. His first act was to establish a new capital, Jerusalem. The city, once occupied by the Jebusites, fell to David's forces, and he made it the political and spiritual heart of Israel. David retrieved the Ark of the Covenant, bringing it to Jerusalem with great celebration. He danced before the Lord, unashamed in his worship. Though some mocked him, David's heart remained steadfast. His reign was marked by justice, mercy, and expansion, as Israel grew strong under his rule. One night, as David rested in his palace, he longed to build a house for the Lord. But the prophet Nathan brought a divine message. God had chosen instead to build David's house an eternal dynasty. From David's lineage would come the Messiah, the King of Kings. David, overwhelmed, fell to his knees in gratitude. Though he would not see the fulfillment of this promise in his lifetime, he knew his reign was part of God's greater plan. David's journey from shepherd to sovereign was filled with trials, victories, and divine interventions. He was not without flaws, yet he remained a man after God's own heart. His story is one of perseverance, faith, and destiny, a testament to how God exalts the humble and fulfills his promises in his perfect time. And thus, David became king. Understand the mysteries of the Bible, explore the power of prayer, and discover the profound impact of living a life surrendered to Christ. Subscribe to The Faithful Journey and let's embark on this journey of faith together.